Well, the choir just beautifully presented my sermon. I really should just pronounce the benediction and let you go to lunch early. But I'm not going to do that. I'm reading from Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 1. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power, so that you may have all endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God reconciled to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. It's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The first time I saw Salvador Dali's remarkable painting, The Sacrament of the Last Supper, was when I happened upon it during an all-too-quick dash through the National Gallery of Art when Anita and I lived in Washington, D.C. As I rushed past most of the art, barely taking it in, I caught a glimpse of Dali's painting, and it stopped me in my tracks. Maybe you've seen it. I'll try to describe it. The disciples are seated around a massive stone table with their heads bowed low in reverence and in anticipatory grief, because this is the night before Jesus will die. And Jesus has his left hand lightly touching his chest, and his right hand is pointing above him. And behind and above him, what he's pointing to is an image of his own arms widely stretched out on the cross. And he's suffused, these arms are suffused with sunrise golden light. And the contrast between the somberness and sorrow of the Last Supper, the night before death, and the all-embracing love of the risen Christ is remarkable. It's a way of saying, yes, God is with us when we anticipate the worst, and God embraces us when God gives us what is best, what only God can give us. This painting says without words that Jesus' self-giving, saving love is at the heart of everything. At the center of the universe, Jesus is God's welcoming, embracing, sheltering arms, God's scarred, strong, tender hands. And my words, I think really anyone's words, just can't begin to capture the wonder and the beauty of this truth, the wonder and the beauty of Jesus. And where words fail, art helps. And so does music, especially for me music helps. Because music helps us to soar into heights words alone can never take us. Songs and hymns lift our hearts beyond our doubts and fears into the presence of the holy and the mysterious. At some of the lowest, most painful and difficult moments of my life, thank God, hymns rise up. And one in particular, I find myself at those bleakest moments singing, don't worry, I'm not going to sing, singing, oh love that will not let me go. I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be. That song takes suffering and pain back into the arms of God, or reminds me that I never left the arms of God. Oh, love that will not let me go. And very soon the Advent season begins and the anticipation of Christmas. And I find as I get older that almost all year long I sing, say, pray the words of that beautiful Christmas carol. Be near me, Lord Jesus. I ask thee to stay close by me forever. And help me, I pray. There's something about music, the combination of words and harmony and rhythm. There's something about music that takes us places or reminds us that we're already in places that words alone cannot. And I just read from Colossians 1, especially verses 15 through 20, I just read one of the early church's hymns. There's not much doubt that these words were sung, not said, by the early church. And so when this letter was read to the followers of Jesus in Colossae, I have no doubt that they were in their minds and hearts singing these words. And the singing of the words reminded them of the greatness, the embracing love of Jesus Christ. I imagine that they heard these words much as we might hear love divine, all loves excelling. Remember that stanza that says, all thy works with joy surround thee, earth and heaven reflect thy rays, stars and angels sing around thee, center of unbroken praise. Because what this hymn does is celebrates, exalt, praises the wonder, the majesty, the mystery, the awesomeness of Jesus. Notice what this text says about Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, the head of the body, the church, the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. In him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. These words point beyond themselves to a reality that saves and sustains us. And it reminds us that if we want to know who God is, we look upon Jesus. God is eternally like Jesus. And notice, too, that there is nothing beyond the hands of Jesus, this hymn says. In him, all things in heaven and on earth were created. He himself is before all things. In him, all things hold together. Through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things. This is a vast Jesus who is everywhere, always present, in all things, in all people, which means in us, in you. The sheer magnitude of Jesus reminds me of one of my favorite spirituals. I don't know if you know these words or not, but they say, my God is so high, you can't get over him. My God is so low, you can't get under him. My God is so wide, you can't get round it. No matter where, no matter what, there is Jesus. This morning I'm drawn in particular to that phrase that says, in Jesus all things hold together. Jesus is the glue of the cosmos. Jesus is the magnet that draws everything to himself. In him, all things hold together. And I think about those outstretched arms on the cross and those outstretched arms for eternity, welcoming, calling, embracing, holding. And I hear that spiritual the choir offered us. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the wind and the rain in his hands. He's got the tiny little baby in his hands. He's got you and me, brother. He's got you and me, sister. He's got the whole world in his hands. Now, we want more than anything else to trust that that's true, don't we? But honestly, it's hard sometimes, isn't it? How can the whole world be in his hands? How can we say, in him all things hold together, when so many things seem to be falling apart before our very eyes? I often feel these days that things are coming loose and breaking down. Maybe you do too. As Yeats famously said in his poem, The Second Coming, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Doesn't that seem to be true? Sometimes? Often? Wars, brutal and gruesome wars between Israel and Hamas, between Russia and Ukraine, leaving people without roofs over their heads or food for their children or hope for tomorrow. Institutions we once trusted, crumbling from within. Lives lost to fire and flood, brokenness of so many kinds. He's got the whole world in his hands. Roy Blunt Jr., the humorist and writer, said, "My mother loved me to pieces. She always said, 'Roy, I love you to pieces.' And he said, 'I'm still trying to put those pieces back together.'" Roy Blunt acknowledged what some of us know and find it sometimes difficult to admit. Sometimes we are shattered by the people closest to us. Sometimes we worry that we're going to crack under all the pressure. Some of us know we can't keep living the way we're living, but we can't figure out how to stop. Still others are watching their dreams die by delay and deferral and disappointment. So how can we trust? How can we trust that the whole world is in the hands of Jesus? That in him all things hold together because he holds all things. Remember that contrast between the bowed heads, heavy with grief of the disciples, and the vision of the resurrected Jesus embracing the whole world. Thursday night, Good Friday, the day of crucifixion, those are real days too. And sometimes we find ourselves living on Friday and Saturday and wondering, are these the only kinds of days we're going to experience? Is it always the silence of the tomb on Saturday, the suffering of the cross on Friday, the ponderous grief of Thursday? Is that what it is always? When Jesus was crucified, the air was thick with mockery and derision. The soldiers said, "You said you could save others. Why can't you save yourself?" And the religious leaders said the same thing. You said you were the one to come, the one to deliver us. Why can't you deliver yourself? The Romans put a placard above his cross, and they meant it ironically and mockingly. This is the King of the Jews, because they wondered, what kind of king allows himself to be crucified? Because the cross in that world was not at all something heroic or holy. It was scandalous and shameful and an embarrassment. There was no greater humiliation than the cross, and Jesus experienced it. My God, why have you forsaken me? It feels that way sometimes. And Jesus felt that perhaps he was slipping out of the hands of God in that moment of pain and suffering. But remember the last word? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. The grief, the anticipated grief of Thursday, the pain of Friday, the silence of Saturday, those are real, but they are not eternal. Resurrection is eternal. The power of suffering love, the strength to wrestle hope from despair and love from the ruins. God's power does not always protect us from death, but God's power always brings life out of death. God's power doesn't always shield us from tragedy, but God's love, God's power can transform tragedy. Nothing else can, but God's love can. Greg Boyle, some of you know Father Greg Boyle, the Jesuit priest who is the founder of Homebody Industries in Los Angeles, working with former gang members and drug addicts to give them a shot at a new life. Boyle visited 15-year-old gang member Rigo at Camp Page, a juvenile detention center. Rigo was Catholic and was about to take his first communion, and Father Boyle was there to lead the service, and he had a chance to talk to Rigo while they waited on others to come into the gym for the service. got acquainted with Rigo, and he asked Rigo to tell him about his father. Now, I've edited what Rigo said lightly so that I can say it in church, but use your imagination. Oh, he's a heroin addict and never really been in my life. Used to always beat me. In fact, he's in prison now. Barely even lived with us. And while Rigo was talking about his father, something snapped in Rigo, and he poured out a painful story to Greg. I think I was in the 4th grade. I came home, sent home in the middle of the day, got into some trouble at school, can't remember what. When I got home, my father was there. He was hardly ever there. My dad said, "Why'd they send you home?" Because my dad always beat me. I said, "If I tell you, you promise you won't hit me?" He just said, "I'm your father. Of course I'm not going to hit you." So I told him. And at that point, Rigo started to cry and was soon wailing and rocking back and forth. And Greg Boyle put his arms around this teenage boy who continued to cry inconsolably. And when Rigo was finally able to speak, he said, "He beat me with a pipe." With a pipe. When Rigo got calmer, Boyle said, "And your mom?" Rigo pointed across the room to a tiny woman standing by the door. "That's her over there," he said. "There's no one like her. I've been locked up for more than a year and a half. She comes to see me every Sunday. You know how many buses she takes every Sunday just to see my sorry self?" And Rigo started to cry again. But this time the tears were tears of gratitude and relief. It took him a while, though, to catch his breath and to be able to speak again. Boyle said, gasping through his tears, he said, 7 buses. She takes 7 buses. Imagine. What Rigo's father did with his hands and a pipe is nowhere in the character of God or in the hands of Jesus. The God we have in Jesus is like Rigo's mom, doing whatever it takes to convince us that he's got us in his hands. Frederick Buechner was flying somewhere, and he said all of a sudden the plane got in such a patch of turbulence that it started to heave and buck like a wild horse. He said, "I'm an uneasy flyer under the best of circumstances, and I was terrified that my hour had come." And then suddenly I wasn't terrified because something passed through my mind, like songs and hymns can pass through ours. And it was actually a line from Deuteronomy, most likely a fragment of a psalm, a song. Underneath are the everlasting arms. And for a few minutes, Buechner said, I not only understood what it meant, but felt in my nethermost depths that without a doubt it was true. That underneath, undergirding, transcending any disaster that could possibly happen, those arms would be there to save me, even if my worst fears were realized. Underneath, around, holding, blessing, consoling, redeeming are the arms and hands of Jesus. He's got the whole world. He's got you and me, brother. You and me, sister. He's got the whole world in his hand.